Welcome to Tanach Study and to Sefer Study. I'm Nachliel Selavan, and you are watching Archaeology Snapshot, our series where we cover all of Tanach, going over every single Sefer in terms of archaeology, history, and so on. And in honor of Chag Shavuot, we bring to you Megillat Ruth, the Book of Ruth. And as you know, in every episode we strive to cover these four questions, which is, when is the story happening? Who are the main players? Where are the locations? With highlights from history and archaeology. When it comes to Megillat Ruth, first of all, we have to ask the question of when exactly is it happening. The story of Megillat Ruth is more of a story, a love story, which ends up leading to the birth of David haMelekh. And there really isn't much of an antagonist-protagonist in terms of enemies. We don't really know who the bad guys are, put it that way. Our story takes place in Beit Lechem, Yehuda, with a family who goes into Sde Moav, roughly in this area of Jordan. And we have three different possibilities as to which route they took on the way there and on the way back. And from north to south, I'm just going to mention the three routes that are brought in Dat Mikra. The first one is called Derech Bet HaYeshimot, which is the wilderness. It's basically how we came in to Eretz Yisrael with Yehoshua, and it follows down from north to south what's known as King's Highway. And from those of you in Brooklyn, no, not that one. That's the King's Highway, Derech haMelekh. The second one is called Derech Moav, which is cutting through the Dead Sea. And the third one is called Derech Edom, which is how Bnei Israel attempted to enter, and Edom stopped us from going in, and so we continued up north and entered from Beit HaYeshimot, which is all in Chumash. We've mentioned Moav before, even though it's a later time, which is Mesha, the king of Moab. This is the famous Mesha stela found in the Louvre. It mentions Bnei Gad, it mentions Ever HaYarden, it mentions Atarot and Dibon, and it mentions a story which is brought in Melachim Bet Perek Gimel. We've gone over that several times, so let's just get that out of the way for now. But anyway, our story takes place in a setting which is not really indicative of when it's happening. All we have to go on is the word Shvot HaShoftim. Now this picture in the backdrop is an area north of Midba. This is a typical landscape in Sde Moab, which is very similar to the Judean hills, so the setting geographically is very similar. All we know is that there's a Sadeh. It's set up to compare and contrast, perhaps, Sde Moab with Bet Lechem Yehuda and the Sadot, the fields that are there, and our story really takes place in that period of time, which is between Ktsir HaSeorim and Ktsir HaChitim, between Pesach and Shavuot. So it's really related to this period of time, even though you can say that the minhag to read it on Shavuot is really only from the Geonim, but it really fits in terms of Pesach and Shavuot and Ketzirat HaOmer. It relates, and we're going to talk about that soon. But I want to talk about when. We don't really know when Megillat Ruth takes place. We have only several clues to go on, and there's a discussion in Chazal, in fact, in where exactly to fit it. So we have Vayhi b'mei Shvot HaShoftim as the opening statement, in the days in which the judges judged. And besides the fact that that's a bit of a repetitive statement, I mean, just say b'mei HaShoftim, and Chazal say that that is indeed indicative of it being either in the beginning or at the end of Tkufat HaShoftim. There are several different discussions in Chazal as to when exactly to place it. There are some, as you may know, who identify Boaz with Ivtzan, but the bottom line is we don't really have an absolute answer. However, if you do the math, Megillat Ruth ends with a genealogical list, with a list of the family line from Yehuda and Tamar and Peretz going all the way down to our story, which is kind of cool, by the way, but that's beyond the scope of archaeology. And then we have the line of Boaz and Ruth leading up to David. So we have Oved, Yishai, and David. And that's 4 generations. So you can assume that a generation is about 25 years, which is a nice average to work with. And you can say that it's basically about 100 years before David haMelekh. And we have a pretty good idea of when David haMelekh lived. We're talking about the beginning of the 10th century, so like 2,900 to 3,000 years ago. Let's put it that way. So this is a little bit more. It's closer to 3,100 perhaps. So that's all we have to go on. It's known as Iron Age 1. It's Tkufat HaShoftim. We've done that before. But what I want to point out is that Shvot HaShoftim is a redundant statement because you can just say Bimei HaShoftim. Bimei Shvot HaShoftim is describing the environment which is necessary for the formation of Malchut, for the rise of the king. And that is Shvot HaShoftim. As Chazal say, Dor sheshofet et shoftav, a generation which judges its judges. You can call it anarchy, and that's very similar to what is happening today around the world. But it's also a kind of self-organization of society to try to come together to define itself and have some kind of figure to represent it, to kind of struggle with its identity. Who are we? And that is what is necessary to get to Malchut. So in terms of Shvot HaShoftim, it's that period of time of the Shoftim, which is kind of chaotic. I mean, you have all these charismatic characters like Shimshon and Ivtzan and Gidon. I mean, these people are, I mean, they're kind of out of this world, right? They're like superheroes. But the moment you have a king, it's all institutionalized, and things are a little more, I guess, normal, you can say. And kind of like today, where, you know, things are falling apart and people are trying to figure out how things are going and trying to find the right and just path. And this takes us to the main backdrop of the story, which has to do with agriculture. Chag HaKatzir is the name of Shavuot in Torah. It's called Chag HaKatzir or Chag HaBikurim, when you bring the first fruits to the Bet HaMikdash. And what I want to really stress here is that in biblical times, in the times of the Tanach, people were so in touch with agriculture. Today, we need so many different layers of explanation and props and pictures and images to kind of take us back to what was intuitive to people. People understood Charish, Katzir, Aviv, Asif, all of these things which have to do with the holidays. Today, agriculture is done by farmers who are using very sophisticated technology, which enables us to produce a surplus, which enables us to really sustain our modern lifestyle, which includes having a tremendous amount of food always accessible, always available. But that's not the way things used to be. Things used to be very different. And in order to explain this, I want to talk about the two tablets. Not the two Luchot HaBrit, but I got your attention. Let's talk about these two tablets. The tablet on the right is from ancient Sumer. We're talking about something that's over 4,000 years old. And it is a guide for the Sumerian farmer with instructions on when and how to cut your grain, at what point, how green does it have to be, how dry, how moist. I mean, all these things that today we are so distant from unless we really have our hands dirty in the ground. Touching the earth and feeling the plants, we're distant from this. We don't know anything about this. And so, for example, many of the mishalim, the metaphors, the nevuot of the nevi'im, the prophets, are using these day-to-day concepts that everybody was aware of from their daily involvement in it. So this is one. The one on the left is called the Gezer Calendar, and it has nothing to do with carrots, perhaps if that's what the farmer was growing, but it's called the Gezer Calendar because it was found in Tel Gezer, which is a biblical city which is mentioned in Melachim, and it's a city which has several fortifications, and I'm going to talk about Gezer a little bit in the next point, but it's one of the, if not the earliest Hebrew inscription ever found, roughly from the time of our story, perhaps even earlier. And it is clearly a calendar which mentions the months of the year in terms of what agricultural activity you need to do at that month. So this is the story of the Gezer Calendar, and I'm going to link to that in the description if you want to read up about the Gezer Calendar. It's very famous. It is in Istanbul, but of course there's a copy in the Israel Museum. And before you go on and check out those show notes, please hit the like button on the video. And I'm just going to mention why that's important, because you probably watch a lot of YouTube videos. You have to understand that in today's day and age, everyone is competing for your attention, for your 5 seconds of attention. And in order for YouTube to know which video to show you to watch next in that split second that you're going to glance sideways and look for other videos to watch, if you hit that like button, the algorithms, the mathematics, the formulas of Facebook or Instagram or LinkedIn or YouTube or whatever it is in social media are going to know what to present to other people who are similar to you in terms of their interests or things that you might like. It's going to tell you, oh, you're going to want to see more of this because you like this. So it's in your benefit to click that like button, and that's why I spent those few seconds. And now let's continue. So let's talk about ancient Egypt. Well, not really, but I want to show you pictures from ancient Egypt which describe in full color the activities of farmers. The Egyptians were the farmers of the ancient Near East. They were the producers of bread. They were the inventors of bread. And so their tomb paintings have many descriptions of the various stages of planting and collecting grain. So I'm just showing you these images. And as I'm showing you these images from Olam HaTanach in the backdrop, I want to mention that there's a video by that there's a video called Rain and Grain, which I'm going to link in the description. It's not on YouTube, it's on Vimeo. And that video shows you how all of the Shalosh Regalim, Pesach, Shavuot, Sukkot, all revolve around grain. Now, I'm sure you know that, but the way they show it is beautifully done. It's fun. I've shown this video to kids. I highly recommend it. Check out their other videos as well. You can follow them on social media. I'm going to link to that in the description. Check out Rain and Grain so you can appreciate Chag HaKatzir and Chag HaBikurim and Chag HaPesach and Chag HaSukkot in terms of the relationship to Eretz Yisrael, to the land. And on that note, I'm going to take us to our final point, which really has to do with the land. And that is really the theme throughout, and that is really the thread of the drama throughout the story. Between the lines is really the story of the field of Elimelech, Naomi's husband, and that field was sold in their poverty and given away. And now when they come back from Sdei Moab and they're trying to rebuild their family, and a big part of rebuilding the family is our land in Eretz Yisrael, they want to redeem that land through the laws of Yibum as well, because when you come to be Goel Sadeh, to redeem a Sadeh, you also need to redeem the entire family, and that includes Yibum. Now, there's many layers of halakha that have changed since then, so obviously we are not immediately associating marrying the wife of Machlon with redeeming the field of Elimelech, but the two are assumed to be connected. Now, I want to mention a couple things in terms of archaeology. Number one, when Boaz makes the purchase of the field, the Geulah of the Sadeh, feasible, in tandem, in connection with the marriage, the Yibum, the Levirate marriage, in the capacity of a family member of Elimelech, it says, Boaz Allah Hashara. He comes up to the Shar, to the gate of the city, and that is where the transaction happens. Now, we've mentioned this several times before, I'm quite sure of it, but I'm showing you a picture that I took in Tel Gezer, which is called today Shar Shlomo, the gate of Shlomo, of Solomon. And I'm going to mention that this is not the first and not the last controversy in terms of identifying something biblical. There are many scholars who will tell you that this gate is later than the time of Shlomo HaMelech, but the point is that this city of Gezer was built by Shlomo HaMelech at a certain point, and it was part of the relationship that he had with Paro and marrying Bat Paro, and this city was given to Shlomo. Anyway, this is a chambered gate. What is a chambered gate? The gates of the city had several chambers to protect it. And I want to give you an imaging of what a chambered gate looked like. This is the one in Tel Lachish. Such chambered gates have been found in several sites in Israel, not only Tel Gezer and Lachish, but also Chatzor, Megiddo, and other places, perhaps Kayafa. And it's a broad conversation of how early can we date these gates. Does it fit into the conversation of it being built by David and Shlomo, or is it earlier, is it later? I'm not going to get into that conversation, but I want to show you that in these chambers, in the entrance to the gate, there are seats for the judges to sit in. We've actually found these benches, so you can kind of see them in the one that's in the outer chamber of the city. You can look at this picture. And the point is that that's where the shoftim and the shotrim would always sit. Shoftim v'shotrim titen lecha b'chol she'arecha. So it's at the gate. The market is on the outside of the city. The city defends the people inside, and so that's where all of the judgment happens. That's where the jurisdiction happens, because that's where it's supposed to be, right? You don't have to go and schlep all your way to the local court. It has to be there, right in front of the city where the market's happening. So that is where Boaz brings his case to the Zekenim, and they judge. And in this case, there is a story of Geulat Sadeh, which is the redemption of a field through a member of the family after the field was sold in poverty. And that's in order to maintain the family connection to the land, the name of the family. The name of the deceased should not be erased from Am Yisrael. And that's also part of Yibum, to make sure that the name of the person who died does not go out into oblivion, but rather it lives on. I'm showing you an example of a very ancient text from Ugarit, which is a Canaanite city in today's Lebanon, and it shows you that there is a contract which relates to a very similar concept of redeeming a field by a family member. This is from Olam Tanach. If you want to pause and read the Hebrew, it's a lot of fun. But either way, my point is this is not unusual in the ancient Near East. But if you want to speak about something which is really unusual, let's wrap up with a little bonus and surprise that I prepared for you, and that has to do with Chag HaShavuot and the burial of David haMelekh. We've mentioned in several episodes that there are traditions of burial of different biblical figures, such as Kever Chavakuk and Kever Yonah and Kever Esther and Mordechai and Daniel. Some of them are more solid than others. Some of them have Christian and Muslim traditions as well, and they're considered holy sites by other religions, because remember, they do accept Tanach, except they sort of added on to it. So Kever David is a very interesting one, because the earliest mention that we have of Kever David is from a 12th century Jewish traveler called Benjamin of Tudela, or Binyamin Mitudela. Kever David today is in the south of the Jewish quarter. It's called Har Zion. Biblical Har Zion is Har HaMoriah. It's Bet HaMikdash. It is not Mount Zion of today, but that's what we call Har Zion today. So if there is a lesson to be learned from here, is be very skeptical of names of biblical places, because you never know if it's just a misnomer or it's a mistake. It's a fun conversation. But Kever David, we don't really know if it is Kever David or it's not. I know we would like to think it is Kever David, and it's going to be very comforting to know that we have that grave. We don't really honestly know. I'm being very genuine with you. There are suggestions that it may be Kivrei Beit David, but the site right now has been really popularized and turned into a tourist location. So you see there's this beautiful statue of David haMelekh playing the harp outside of it. You see what it looks like inside. I'm a Kohen, so I don't go inside. I've never really been inside. But this is a site where perhaps hundreds, if not thousands, of people are planning on visiting tonight and again, until they pray tomorrow morning in nets. Of course, under consideration, there's several recent events which might make this a little bit difficult, unfortunately, but let's hope that it all works out for the best. The building, which is called David's Tomb, is a building which is also owned by the Franciscan Church. They have an opinion that perhaps the Last Supper was there. So there's fights about it between Jews and Christians and legal battles that are unending. It's a long story. I'm not going down that path, but what I'm going to say is that there were actually excavations here around 1948, when this area was basically an outpost for Jewish defenders of the city of Jerusalem when it was under Jordanian control, before the Six-Day War, between 1948 and 1967, and they were able to find remnants of something which is perhaps Herodian, in other words, late Second Temple period, but basically Roman. And unfortunately, the archaeologist who excavated there was shot by the Jordanians and killed, and never resumed his excavation. And it's a very loaded political discussion of who can dig there and when and what and who, so no excavations are happening now. Welcome to Israel. Welcome to the Old City. That's all I got for you for today. Thank you very much for watching, and I want to wish you and your family Chag Kasher v'Sameach. May you come to Eretz Yisrael if you're not already in Eretz Yisrael, and bizocheh, merit to have the beautiful fruits of the land, as it is indeed Chag HaBikurim. And I'll see you on the next one.